So welcome everybody. Welcome to our governance webinar today titled The Art of Collaborative Leadership. We're having a discussion today with Fiona McKenzie, Dr. Dean Blomson and Julie Garland McClellan. Very exciting. Thank you for attending today. We really appreciate the effort you make to be here for our live events. And if you have any questions, please type them into the question box on your toolbar if you can, rather than chat. It enables us just to keep a track of the questions. If you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our Board Pro webinars, we have a special treat for you. You'll go in the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth, I think this one is over $400. So congratulations to Katie Horn from last week, being our winner last week. So for those not too familiar with Board Pro, we are a board software provider, sometimes called a board portal, and we serve about 30,000, in fact, I think it's 32,000 users now around the world in about 29 different countries. And we enable organizations to run their board meetings more effectively with clever software, with less time, and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we're a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance easy to access, especially those organizations with resource constraints. So these particular webinars and the many masterclasses, the templates, guides, and white papers that we produce are a tangible example of how we look to achieve our mission to serve small to medium businesses and nonprofits. So for the next 40 odd minutes, just relax and ask questions. We hope you'll do. A full recording of the webinar along with the resources will be available at the end of the session. In fact, it'll be available tomorrow. You'll receive an email from me. So let me hand over to our team now for introductions, starting with Fiona first. Over to you, Fiona.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Fiona McKenzie. I'm dialing in from Sydney, Australia, from the Gadigal lands of the Eora people. So I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and extend that respect to First Nations people joining us from Aotearoa and anywhere else around the world today. I'll introduce myself. I'm a negotiation and conflict specialist. I have a background in management consulting. But for the last 10 years, I've been helping leaders use conflict and negotiation to boost their effectiveness. In my opinion, we are negotiating all of the time. Almost every interaction has some form of negotiation. So it's actually a fundamental human skill that we all should get better at. And with regard to conflict, this sounds really strange, but I actually really love conflict. I know that avoiding it is natural, but we only make progress when we actually engage with it. In my work, I see that there's always some sort of gap. There's a deal that needs negotiating. There's some sort of conflict to resolve, or there's a group of people that simply aren't on the same page, and closing that gap is the work that I do. And I do it with training and coaching and facilitating collaborative meetings with boards and leadership teams. So what would a negotiation and conflict expert know about collaboration? I'm sure you're all wondering. Well, actually, conflict is a key part of collaboration. And we'll be looking at that in due course. But now I'd like to hand over to Julie and Dean to introduce themselves.
Julie, you first.
Okay, hi, I'm Julie Garland McClellan. I guess quite a few of you know me already. I do a lot of work consulting to boards on practical governance, using both my qualifications and my experience on my own boards, which I've been doing now for more than 25 years, so just a smidgen of experience there. And I just was so excited about this webinar because one of the things I've observed on boards is that you are supposed to be making team-based decisions, and anything that helps build the skill to build that team and make those decisions is a really good asset for boards to have. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you, and good day to everybody. Nice to meet you. I might have met some of you remotely on some other seminars I've delivered through Board Pro. I come from a a strategic and transformation advisory role, many, many years in consulting and in corporate. But the essence of all strategy, of all transformation, resides on the will, intent, and capabilities of leaders. So I've got more than a passing interest in the subject. I teach on strategic decision making and how directors and executives can make better decisions. So I teach on that. I teach on corporate strategy. And I also teach a program called Strategic Leadership, as if there's any other kind of leadership, but strategic leadership is the title. So there you go. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Fiona has to say. I don't know a whole lot about negotiating, other than perhaps I've picked up some mediocre, maybe some good habits over the years to osmosis. So this will be a very interesting conversation for me to listen into and hopefully contribute to.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, team. Right, back to you, Fiona. Over to you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So what is collaborative leadership? Well, one definition is that collaboration is when people come together to contribute their expertise to benefit a shared objective. So we've got a coming together, contributing expertise and sharing an objective. But let's talk about what that means for leadership teams and boards. And actually, let's also talk about what it doesn't mean, just as important. So collaboration is focused on decision-making that is team-oriented. So it's not individualistic or autocratic or hierarchical. Collaboration is about purposeful relationships, wanting to achieve a shared outcome. I can hear you saying, oh, but that all of your boards and leadership teams would operate with purposeful relationships and shared outcomes. It sounds easy, but it's not. Collaborative leadership is the inclusion of diverse perspectives. It's not fake harmony or kumbaya. I don't know if that expression is used outside of Australia. So kumbaya was an old campfire. I can see Julie nodding. Kumbaya is an old campfire song that I sang as a kid and lots of us did. It's come to mean it's sort of like a cynical critique of consensus or collaboration. And so collaborative leadership isn't fake harmony or kumbaya. Real collaborative leadership isn't paying lip service to those things. It's including diverse perspectives. It's not conflict avoidance. It's searching for understanding of everybody's views. Collaborative leadership is empowering people to contribute. It's definitely not micromanagement, and it's not removing autonomy from people. And the final point there, open communication is a feature of collaboration and a feature of collaborative leadership. It's all about transparency. Julie and Dean, we've got a model coming up that we'll work through, but before we dive into that, are there any features of collaborative leadership that you see as relevant for boards?
I see that whole team-oriented decision-making as being one of the things that sets apart the really great boards from the just about good enough boards. When you get that team orientation and you get those different perspectives, it really does improve the quality of your decisions. It actually makes them harder to make because you have to go through more of a process. And just a comment, I see that first dot point as something that is enabled by the four below. So I'm interested to learn, maybe that's my ignorance speaking, but I'm really interested to see the model and learn a bit more about it. Dean, what are you excited about?
I love the way you put that. I think it's a consequence of all the others. And I also think it's having a contest of ideas that are tested in a trusting environment. Anyway, so I'm in heated agreement with you.
Right. So, folks, this is the model. I really like developing models in my work. I think it helps to simplify concepts. It makes concepts easier to understand and also easier to recall. Now, it's a little bit cerebral. It's a little bit, a mini university course when we're working through a Venn diagram like this. But my hope is that seeing a concept like collaborative leadership in this three-circle Venn will actually help you have that in the frame of mind when you're dealing with a situation that should be more collaborative in your leadership team or your board. So I see the main components of collaborative leadership as conflict, contribution, and communication, and specifically positive conflict, empowered contribution, and transparent communication. Collaboration is a great thing and it can enhance relationships and transform decision-making, but it is more challenging than you might think. You can see from the model, and particularly from the intersections there, that there are healthy doses of conflict, feedback, and accountability. So we're actually going to step through all of the components of this. So Sean, if you can flick to the next slide, and we'll take a look first at positive conflict. I imagine that you expected to see words like contribution and communication in a model about collaboration. So conflict is the unusual one. I spoke about positive conflict at a recent Board Pro webinar on difficult conversations. If you want to go back and have a look at that, there's another model there. It's a 2x2 matrix, that one. I won't dwell on it too much here, except to say that positive conflict is the opposite of complacency. It's where leaders are willing to step into conflict rather than remain complacent or get combative, or worse still, pretend that there's harmony when there isn't, when there's actually underlying simmering tension. I see this fake harmony everywhere. I was working with a board recently where board members could see what was happening, but they didn't feel empowered or actually really safe enough to speak up. So fake harmony isn't good governance. Positive conflict is. So when I say positive conflict, I'm not talking about conflict for conflict's sake. I'm talking about valuing and seeking out diversity of opinion so that blind spots are identified and decisions are fully explored. Boards that want constructive dialogue, boards that always want constructive dialogue, not just a room full of people who agree. That's what positive conflict is. And it's a group who are always trying new ideas and not glossing over risks for the sake of some sort of false sense of security. So willingness to step into conflict is an important aspect of collaboration. But as soon as you do this, you're allowing a whole lot of extra perspectives and priorities to be exposed. And inevitably, you will have disputes. If you're doing it properly and you don't have disputes, you're not doing it properly. So luckily, there's an upside of disputes because it's when they're resolved that you actually get the value. So you've sort of got to walk through the dark valley to get to the sunlight at the top of the mountain. Conflicts and disputes don't mean failure. They're actually a catalyst for growth. Now, some of you might receive a newsletter every day from Seth Godin. He's an American academic. He's initially a marketing specialist, but he speaks more broadly about lots of things. They're little, sharp, short things. He's got, I don't know, millions of readers. In one of his newsletters this week, he wrote about creating more tension. He said, we don't ask for it, but we always remember. Tension changes us. It's the feeling we experience just before we grow. That's how I feel about the need for positive conflict. If you want to be collaborative, so positive conflict is the feeling we experience just before we grow or just before we get through the valley and up into the sunshine. There's another quote that I like. I've tried to find the origin and it's attributed to lots of different people, to Churchill, to Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great and lots of other management books, and also to Mr. Wrigley of chewing gum fame. Doesn't really matter who said it. The quote's awesome. Listen to this. If you have two people who agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. That's how I feel about positive conflict. You actually need to be looking for those alternate views. Otherwise, everyone else is unnecessary if they all agree with you. So diversity of thought and constructive disagreement are essential for progress. When everyone in a group thinks the same way, innovation and growth stagnate. True collaboration thrives on exploring different perspectives that will challenge ideas and push boundaries. So I'd like to throw to the panel now. Julie and Dean, do you have any insights about positive conflict or constructive disagreement? You might think of it as a pillar for collaboration by board members.
Julie, you want to go?
Yeah, if you don't. I think it's really important with the positive conflict that it's a conflict between ideas, perspectives, and views, not between people. And when your conflict gets personal, you're not doing your job as a director. And about the only time when the conflict can be aimed at a person is when you need to remove that person from the team. And that is usually, or hopefully, a very infrequent event for most boards. So it's really important. There have to be rules around how you generate and use conflict. I always like as well to talk about, because I was originally an engineer before I became a company director, I like the concept that without friction, you have no traction. And so if you want to make progress, there is going to be some friction on that interface. And just knowing the difference between enough friction to get a good grip and get going, and so much friction that you burn up and self-combust, or not enough friction and it's like running on ice. So getting the balance right, and a good chair, the role of your chair in managing that conflict, is really important. And Dean, you probably see a lot of healthy conflict when you're developing strategy with teams.
Absolutely, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Critical role of the chair is to actually set the tone for that conflict, and in fact, in the nicest possible way, stoke it. And I loved your quote, Fiona, about people who agree on everything. And there's another along similar lines from Alfred Sloan of General Motors, who said, "Gentlemen, as we seem," and it was gentlemen, I suppose, in those days, as we seem to agree on everything, I suggest we reconvene tomorrow when we have developed some healthy disagreements. And so the chair has to set that tone. And I think this conflict goes both ways. It's the positive conflict within the boardroom, and then it's also those dynamic and healthy tensions with the CEO, with the CFO. And I really like your model, Fiona. I think what sits behind it for me is that trust and respect, and that CEO feeling that he or she is not being manipulated, worked over, put in a corner, set up to fail. One of the things, so yes, I have seen plenty of positive conflict, but I've also seen better examples where it's stoked deliberately and literally explicitly. I'm going to run a counterfactual, Dean, on what you've just said, because I'm sure there's a different perspective, and here's a counterfactual. How does that sit? Other boards will have red teams on big decisions where you run a counterfactual on a big investment, and it's a clean team that comes in and says, well, what if all these assumptions are wrong, or critical assumptions are wrong, etc. So you can do it in different ways, and the 6-hat methods, etc. There are ways that can do it, but it is a understood, explicit process with the board. And I think one of the best things you can do is to say, let's all agree this is what we're doing, not, gee, I'm putting, Julie now, applying the blowtorch to her, and she feels like suddenly it's personal. We know it's just the way we do things around here, and it's very explicit. Today it's Julie, next day it's Dean. Anyway, that's my 2 bobs worth on it.
My neck's hurting from nodding so much from those fantastic comments. Julie, you mentioned, forgotten the framing you used, but soft on the person and hard on the issue. That's a real fundamental of negotiation. You play for rugby fans, you play the ball, not the man, and yes. Really important. And also, when you mention friction, I've mentioned this word previously on a Board Pro webinar. It's a word that I would never use in public, except now I'm saying it to you, and it's tribology, which is the study of friction. And I really love it, because friction is more important in our daily lives than you would ever expect. For your shoes to, slide on a tennis court, but not slide so far you break a hip, a tribologist is involved with that. Artificial hips, they have to not flick out of place, but they have to slide in the socket. So, and friction for me is like positive conflict, where you don't want so much of it that you're not functioning, but you need some, or you're going to glide off the court. And yeah, Dean, the red teams, I'm involved in a lot of red teams with negotiation prep, where you're actually just pulling everything apart and trying to, wear the black hat on them. It's really important.
Red teams, black hats.
Yeah, so many colors. So black hat is from the 6 hats where, each people, you have someone who's positive, someone who's negative, whatever. Red teaming, it's kind of a consulting firm term for a review of something before it goes to a client. And I use it with a negotiation prep, working with clients prior to a big negotiation. You want to red team the heck out of that negotiation plan.
Yeah, it's very different to the red quadrant on the disc profiles. And this is one of the problems that I find with boards, is that very often people use a word and it means something completely different to someone. And first of all, it prevents them from making the proper contribution they wanted. But secondly, it can spark conflict. So yeah, I'm very pedantic about getting the right word.
Yes. We will get onto communication shortly, but
Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm just saying communication requires clarity of terminology. And so, if you're working in a board or a leadership team and red means this to someone and this to someone else, you've got a problem. And so clarity, transparency of communication is key. But now we're actually going to keep moving on to the next one. Thanks, Sean. It's up there, empowered contribution. So power comes in many forms. People have got positional power, relational power, expert power, charismatic power, and so on. And it's exercised in relationships and interactions, and therefore it's highly influential. And power imbalances and power used in the wrong way derail success. So leaders, chairs, directors all need to recognise their own power and make sure they're fostering collaboration, not dominance. And if contributions by the leadership team and the board are empowered, there's no one voice that dominates. All parties contribute safely and without fear. People aren't micromanaged. Micromanagement is the death knell of empowerment. Tasks are delegated and people are actually trusted to perform. I think, Dean, you mentioned trust earlier. So you might have heard the saying that we should be prioritising people over power, not power over people. So empowering people to contribute means that they have the autonomy to take initiative. So the implications of this for boards and leadership teams is that power imbalances need to be identified and the environment needs to be made safe for contribution. Just this week, I've had 3 separate clients talk to me about the hallway conversation. And so they're in a board meeting or a leadership team meeting and they think they've agreed something, and some loud voices are speaking up and some soft voices aren't being facilitated to contribute. The meeting's over and then there's a hallway conversation where the real decision gets made. I hate that. That is so anti-collaborative and it's poor leadership, and leadership teams and boards need to be encouraged to have the actual conversation and the decision-making dialogue in the room, not in subsets and not in the hallway or on the telephone afterwards. Dean and Julie, what are your insights about that, about the hallway conversation partly, but also how we can make sure that everybody's contributing?
I think getting everyone to contribute and to be willing to be vulnerable, to suggest something and have that idea and that suggestion refuted and not carried. I Actually, no, I don't wish. I was about to say I wish everything I said happened, but actually, no, I don't, because sometimes I'm wrong. And I'm really grateful for my colleagues who pull me back. So having a safe environment for that is one thing. The other thing is when you get these hallway conversations, you wind up with one of 2 situations afterwards. The first is you've made a decision which has been minuted, and then the company goes and does something else. And that is a really dangerous position for a board, because your job is oversight of the company as it implements the decisions that you've made in your duly constituted meetings. And if it ain't in the minutes, there's no authority for management to act, and you're at risk. So there's that one. And then the other thing that happens is you wind up with people writing in the minutes something that did not happen at the meeting. And the word for that is fraud. And if you look at cases where courts have got a whiff of something being written in minutes that didn't actually happen in the meeting, or something not being written in the minutes that did, the courts are very harsh with the directors concerned. So you look at OneTel, their famous last meeting at which there were 3 completely different sets of competing minutes. Or you look at things like James Hardy, where everybody said, oh yes, it's in the minutes, Your Honour, but it never happened. Those directors got pushed as hard as the court could possibly push them. You don't want to willingly go into that situation, which unfortunately happens. We've got a question in the chat, which I might just read out. It's from Denise, and she says, as a chair, do you recommend setting the tone for a safe space at the beginning of each meeting? So I might pop that into the conversation too.
I love that idea. Look, this is a huge topic, right? And we're going to just only strike a glancing blow on it today. Obviously, with Fiona's help here, there are 2 things I'd say about empowered contribution. Firstly, and that the belief is always that I've held, is that leadership is a team sport, and we lead in different ways, and equally we contribute in different ways as a team sport. There'll be those who are quite active in meetings, but made the contribution, shared their ideas. Others will beyond the meeting, maybe when they're in their subcommittee, maybe when they're helping certain executives with certain tasks. I'm saying as NEDs, they are impassioned, they're energized, they are following up on stuff that everybody is contributing in different ways. As Fiona said, and so yes, it's a broad church. One's got to accept as the chair not only how people think and contribute, how they decide. We've all got different decision-making processes that are important to us. One of the most valuable exercises, I'm going to share you an example briefly of where this failed very miserably, a board that I had some dealings with. I'll share that with you in a moment. But one of the most valuable things I think one can do as a chair or even as a board member is to agitate for a board charter, not the kind of board charter that we think about classically, but a charter about how we behave around here, how we engage with each other. Because everybody comes to a board with different baggage about things that they believe in. I'm here because, I want to keep the bastards honest and I'm going to be deep in forensic and prod and poke around stuff. Others because they want to be there to set up the future direction of the business, etc. So actually teasing that out, and a very critical contribution into that board charter, I'll stop the point in a sec, is how do we live out the values and behaviors that we expect of the executives of the business? It's not that leadership is done by the executives. Actually, it starts with the board. Even though we think they're the leaders and we call them the leaders, actually, it starts with us. And I think one's got to be very careful about vacating that responsibility to lead. So talking about how do we behave around here that role models the behaviors and values we expect of our execs. The example I wanted to share, Fiona, very briefly about poorly empowered contribution, as I say, is a board that I was exposed to where, should we say, the chair was challenged by one of the directors in a particular meeting, took umbrage, turned on that director. That director left the room because she was really unsettled, came back and then subsequently, in a private conversation, called out the chair on it. chair didn't like that and then mounted a campaign to oust that director. So completely disempowering, obviously. But the other part of it was the chair was advised by the COSEC, do not prosecute this. There was a sort of a red herring claim that this person hadn't fully disclosed a material interest. Well, it was not material, and it was in the register of interest, the register of interest. So don't prosecute it. Don't prosecute it. The COSEC was shouted down, told, shut up, I'm not listening to you. Shut up, I'm not listening to you. Anyway, brought it back to the board for a full conversation and got ousted. So that is a terrible example of disempowered contribution where you shoot the messenger. Anyway, long story, sad tale, but the board had a fortunate experience, I believe, having advised them on how to deal with this.
I think when I hear the expression how we do things around here, I think of that as culture. So some of the work I do is with boards and leadership teams on culture of positive conflict. And shouting down the messenger is like the antithesis of that, of what we actually want. We should move on because we're running
got another question from Jane, which really is germane to the topic we're talking about. It is, what advice do you have for helping a chair to see that his bold enthusiasm and desire for consensus actually discourages directors to contribute openly?
Consensus is a word that I have a love-hate relationship with. I'm quite interested in the work of the Society of Friends, the Quakers, that like religious movement in the States, and they were the ones that started, well, they certainly made widespread the use of consensus agreement. But consensus has two meanings. It can mean we all have to be 100% in agreement and have the perfectly same view, or it can mean some other way, like however you define your decision role. And so I think if your board is enthusiastic for consensus, that it depends on what the definition of consensus is that's being used. If it means that everybody always agrees 100% of the time, then I think that needs to be fought against. This is not the sort of work that is done quickly. I will sometimes work for months and months and months with boards and leadership teams on this, and it's around that culture change. And so it involves a lot of one-on-one coaching and group training, so everybody's got a clear understanding of what's involved, and then facilitated workshops to actually agree how decisions will get made, who's responsible for what. And so, yes, there's no quick fix when the chair has that view. It's not a bad. I don't think poorly of a desire to have consensus, but different decisions need to be made in different ways. Should we move on? I see Sean's moved us along there. So transparent communication, I think that's fairly clear, and we're running out of time. So communication is an aspect of collaborative leadership that you were probably expecting to see. I think good communication alongside good processes form the basis of good governance. For collaboration, transparency is highly important. Different teams need to share information with each other, and we know from decades of management literature that silos are a problem. I'm moving super quickly here, but one final point about transparent communication is getting the right technology in place. I don't know if you've ever heard of what's that? Board Pro. Take a look at that. We need everything happening in one place and not across countless emails or shared folders. Do you have any quick comments on transparent communication, Julie and Dean? Or shall I move on?
I think we can move on, but I just think it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I rushed it and made fun of it, but it's, communication is going to appear on any model about collaboration.
Or leadership.
Yeah, that's right. So in a Venn diagram, I often find the intersections more interesting than the main circles. So let's take a quick look at this. So where conflict and communication intersect, that's where we've got feedback. So when boards and leadership teams feel safe to provide honest and direct feedback, that's where you get continuous improvement. But do it well. Don't wait until things are going wrong. Have the conversations early, have them often. Facing the tough conversations until you get better at them is the starting point. Difficult conversations are something we should be practicing all of the time.
Yep.
Where conflict and contribution intersect, that's where we have innovation. When positive conflict and autonomy are valued, unique perspectives come to the fore. I'm actually doing a Board Pro webinar on this topic, conflict to innovation, on 5th of December. A little plug for that one. But it's all related, you see. It's about leveraging disagreement to drive creativity. And then the last one there, contribution and communication, where they intersect is where we get accountability. So if you're communicating well with people about their roles and you're transparent about that, they're empowered to do those roles. And as a result, people are accountable. Any comments, Julie or Dean, on those intersections? They're the fun ones.
I love it. It makes complete sense to me. I'm just interested, Fiona, in your perspective about the role that trust and respect plays in this, because to me, trust is the grease, and trust and respect are the grease of relationships. And I'm quite a fan of some of the writing by Francis Fry on this. To what extent can you actually work to build that trust up? Because I think if the trust doesn't work, I'm not sure how much of this works. Do you have any views on it?
No, I totally agree. And that circle around the outside is more because I like the design look of that. But we could think of that as trust and respect in the sense that none of the boxes and intersections are going to work unless there's a joint desire for trust and respect. And positive conflict doesn't work without trust and respect. It's not a one-way thing, it's a two-way thing. And actually, when I'm teaching negotiation tactics and conflict tactics, the very first tactic is about listening. And then contribution is the same. You can't trust people to do their jobs if you don't respect each other. And communication, clearly, that's, if you're not communicating with people, you're not respecting them at all.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that page? We've just got one more, which is a list of suggestions to improve collaboration.
I think accountability is an interesting one, because for accountability to work, it really needs to be personal. I am accountable.
Yes.
And the trouble with boards is that you can have people who practice social loafing. They hide in the group. They don't put in the work. They just turn up to the meetings. And yeah, they might be brilliant people, and every so often they'll make a great contribution. But having that communication to say, look, you've been making a couple of good contributions, but if you'd read your papers before the meeting and actually done some independent, specific and diligent research, you might have made 10 times better contribution. That's tough conversation to have. But I have very little sympathy for directors who don't contribute fully and hold themselves to account. And I know from time to time we're all going to not be able to do as much as we would have liked, but most of the time we should. And then the other one is the feedback. You can also use the interface to feed forwards. So when you know there's something you're doing that you're not doing as well as you possibly could, if you've got the trust and the respect to say, look, this is what I'm working on, tell me when you see it, is a great mechanism for people to say, oh, yes, that's fabulous. And again, it allows that progress and that building and constant replenishing of the team. And there's a wonderful question in the chat from Denise again. Could you provide an example of a comment to be delivered to a member of the board that is not showing for meetings? My advice would be put up or piss off. But am I allowed to say that in your recording, Sean? Sorry. But over to you two. What would you say? I would really hold them to account on that.
Well, certainly on that, I think, as I said at the beginning, I think you've got to think about this in two dimensions and work on both. One is the dynamic within the board, and the second one is the dynamic between the board and the executive. And it's all very well building, for example, that transparent communication within the board. But it's also got to be a space that the CEO, the CFO, whoever he or she is, feels safe as well. For a CEO to stand up to the board and say, I'm not really comfortable with this, or I'm feeling out of my depth on this topic, or I am, extremely concerned, and not to be judged, right? To know that they're not going to be judged or hung is something that takes a huge amount of work, not just by the chair, obviously chair to CEO, but obviously even the board to feel that this is a safe environment. Yes, we may not like your idea, but if we shut it down, then we all know as non-executive directors how much we rely on transparent communication by the executive team, right? If they're not fronting up to us and telling it as it is, not how we want to hear it, but as it is, it's abysmal. And we actually pay a huge price for it, ultimately, I think. So I couldn't overemphasize that. And that's part of that trust, right? Anyway, sorry to go on about it.
I agree. No worries at all. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to move on to this last slide. So these are some strategies for you to improve collaboration. As we've highlighted, this doesn't happen quickly. There is a lot of work. There's a lot of ground setting. There's a lot of culture building to do this properly. But here are a quick summary of some steps. So the first step is actually to set up transparent communication platforms and channels. Actually encourage you to really invest in this. And then once it's set up, seek regular contributions from all stakeholders. Collaborative leadership is about culture as much as anything else. Foster a culture where different opinions are valued, feedback is normalised. That's the key in that sentence. Normalise feedback, make it the way you do things around here. So it's a culture thing. That avoids groupthink, leads to better innovation. And importantly, you need to ensure that quieter members are given the space to share ideas. As we looked at previously, the junction of communication and contribution is accountability. So collaboration means that responsibilities are clear and meaningful, and tasks and decisions are delegated. And when people feel trusted, as Dean said, they're more likely to collaborate and contribute their best work. There's a great tool called RACI, R-A-C-I, if you want to look that up. It's used a lot with leadership teams, less so with boards. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted before a decision, and who needs to be informed after, RACI.
I always like to extend it by having a B on the end. Who could be blindsided by the decision and find out about it after it's happened? And invariably, when we look for the B, we find people that we can then put into the other categories.
Oh, that's lovely. I like that. RACIB, ladies and gents. That's a good one. My favourite, of course, embracing conflict. See it as an opportunity for growth and innovation, not as a negative. I recognise it's hard to go through it and we avoid it, but we're always better off when we get there. It's a leadership capability. And this is paired with developing mechanisms for managing conflict. Conflict actually works better. By better, I mean the benefits are more easily accessed and the downsides are dealt with quicker. It works better when everyone has a shared approach for negotiating conflict. And that's one of the ways that I work with leadership groups. So we need to be creating safe spaces for feedback. And lead by example. I think that came up, from Dean's comments in the first few minutes. We need to be modelling collaborative behaviour as leaders. We need to be showing openness, humility, a willingness to listen, so that we're setting this tone for the entire team and board. I think we're done. So there's some contact details for the three of us on LinkedIn. There's a QR code there to my newsletter. I write something every 2 or 3 weeks. I'm very respectful of people's time, so it's only a 2-minute read. And please,
another question.
And I'll hand over.
And yeah, feel free to put your questions in, because if we can't deal with them, we will get back to you afterwards. And if you're wondering why I'm the one reading the questions, Zoom in its infinite wisdom has decided not to give Sean access to them, which is wonderful, the joy of technology. So the question from Stuart, thank you, Stuart. It seems the key person in all collaboration, culture, and implementation is the chair. If you sit as a director, it's very difficult to change the culture if the chair's not on the same page. Correct?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I think.
Unless you remove the chair.
Yeah.
Righty ho, team, we're at time. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona, for your contribution today. Julie,
My pleasure.
Dean, fantastic. Now, everybody, just as you leave the webinar, don't forget to fill in our little quick 1-minute survey and go into the draw for our gift hamper, which we will announce tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.